Hello, welcome. This is Alan Levin, and in one of my intermittent podcast YouTube series, Crossing the Boundary, in which I have conversations or interviews with people who have made major shifts, boundaries, perhaps you could call them, that they've crossed in consciousness or spiritual orientation or identity, and also another qualifier is that they're doing something really good in this world, making the world a better place. So I'm delighted today to have a friend I've known for quite some time, Carla Detchon. And Carla is a coach, called an integrative coach, and she is also a longtime explorer of the use of psychedelics. And she has now started a podcast called Psychedelic Divas, which she has recently launched. It's fascinating. I've watched several of them already myself. And her her intention on this is to bring the feminine voice into the world of psychedelic as it exists in the world of psychedelics, and sort of strengthen that voice. It's tended to be a male dominated area for as most areas. So anyway, here's Carla, and I want to ask you, Carla, if you would, to just say a little bit about where you all come from, where you were raised, what kind of a family it was. Was there an orientation toward spirituality, toward culture? What was life like growing up?
Well, first of all, Ellen, thank you so much for having me on. And you're right, we have known each other many decades through many transformational processes, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But so for me, growing up was I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I had intact parents, loving parents. I had an older sister, and I grew up really blessed. As I said, my parents were together till my dad died, and um, you know, we had most of our we had I was raised very privileged, and um, I was raised with the spiritual perspective was the Methodist church that was down the street. Although I have to say, it never really landed for me, and apparently. Well, there were some aspects about that church that were problematic, and just by being a nosy little kid, I think I knew more than I was supposed to know at age 12. But at age 12, when I was supposed to go be confirmed, I very sassily told my mother, "Why should I join a church where the minister is an embezzler and the Sunday school teacher is a pedophile?" And I don't know if I knew the word pedophile, but I knew something, obviously.
Mm,
And both of those were true, and unfortunately, and
mm,
my mother did not know how to respond to that, and I did not have to be confirmed. And I think that says sort of a lot about my rebellious
mm.
nature.
Yeah,
But I also,
early rebellion, early rebel.
but I rebelled within a very constricted, like I was a good girl. So like if she had said, doesn't matter, you're gonna get confirmed, then I would have gotten confirmed. My rebellion was very circumscribed. I was a good girl. I was a debutante. I was a sorority girl in college.
Mm,
I had a lot of, all the outer trappings of very you know waspy upbringing, and was scheduled to marry a doctor and have 2.5 kids and live in Florida. And so that's how I was raised.
Mm. Wow. So there's something happened,
Something snapped.
and you've become Carla, the psychedelic diva. So,
That was a journey. I mean, that was definitely that has taken me the last 40 years. So it was not, just
mhm, sure, sure.
but
What were
it
some of the
was
major shifts, would you say, or changes from the
um
transitions?
I think the first major shift was I moved to California after college.
What year was that?
I moved to California in 1985, January of 1985.
Oh, okay.
And I lived in San Francisco for 20 years.
Mhm,
And that just living in San Francisco from 1985 to 2005 was incredibly formative and
mhm,
certainly made me, have more of a liberal, open-minded perspective. I, had a ton of gay friends. This was certainly, this like when I first moved to San Francisco, when I first came to San Francisco in 1983, for the summer after I graduated. I mean, the AIDS epidemic. They were just,
mhm,
putting words and language to it.
mhm.
We didn't know how it was transmitted. We ended up renting, subletting a gay man's apartment, and we actually talked about whether it was safe to stay in this apartment.
Yeah.
So, from 1985 to 2005, let's just, like think of the journey of open-mindedness that happened in the entire country. But San Francisco was on the leading edge of a lot of those changes, and that's the time period I was living there. So it dramatically changed my outlook.
Mhm. And did some of that involve the beginning the use of psychedelics?
It did that summer. So I came out with my college boyfriend. We drove out and spent the summer. So I graduated in 1983. And that summer, since we were in San Francisco, we had done a mushroom journey that he had supplied. We actually did it on the day of my last class. I mean, sorry, my last exam. So I was done with school,
Mhm.
and this was his treat. And I was like, okay, sure. And we had a very fun, very silly, loving experience. But then he wanted, because we were in San Francisco, he wanted to have the San Francisco experience, the pure psychedelic experience. So he wanted to try LSD. And I was, yeah, I talked about this in my first episode. That was a big no for me. I had been raised with the fear that if you did LSD, you would, fly out a window and, kill yourself. And there was, there would be DNA damage, and I mean, just there was a lot of misinformation that was put out into the world especially around LSD, that I had totally, that was my understanding of it. So anyway, he did talk me into it, and we had a beautiful, incredible experience,
Mhm.
um, and really one of my most transformative psychedelic journeys, and
How
that.
would you describe it as being transformative? What happened to you or your consciousness?
Well, the first thing was that, I'm not kidding. We locked the windows, okay? Like just in case. Something we went crazy. And so that was some of the feeling that I went into it, and I came out just knowing, oh, this is a beautiful substance. This is this
Wait,
this
lock the windows because of that fear that maybe you jump out of a window when you take
yes.
LSD?
Yes.
Uh-huh. So you had that
Seriously.
fear,
Yes.
even still, you were able to have just a wonderful experience.
Exactly. So I mean, and LSD it's my favorite medicine. So it felt like a coming home in my body.
Mm,
It felt like, and as a matter of fact, that's one of the things that became clear. It was like, oh, everything they've said has been a lie. Meaning everything that they had said about LSD was, I just had that knowing, and then everything relaxed, and there were no concerns about it. It was just I don't know what our dose was because I wasn't in charge at the time. And by the way, I always recommend that everybody know their dose. Ask who's giving it to you and then look it up and know what that dose is. But my guess is it was probably around 100 micrograms. And it was a beautiful, loving, connecting thing between the two of us. We made a pact that no matter what, we would always be friends, and we still are to this day. So there was that. I mean, we could, you know, like our connection was transcending. We could see that it was transcending that moment, and would continue. Um, but just that place of it started the process of learning to trust my own inner knowing instead of what I was told. And an opening of a
Sure,
boundary. Yeah.
sure. No. Well, it's very interesting too that, because these days, and I think you would recommend to people that they do a good bit of prepreration, that if they have
Absolutely.
fears, they really explore those fears and so forth before doing it.
Yes.
And yet, you had that experience and it actually was a positive transformation that went went further
And
after
you're
that.
right. It could have absolutely, I could have stayed stuck in the fear. It could have been a negative, a whole, negative overlay. I mean, the first thing we had laid out all this food, all these snacks, et cetera. And so the first thing we did was like put all that away. We're like, okay, we don't want any of
No
this.
one food, yeah. I remember my
But
first LSD experience. It wasn't as pleasant as yours. And I looked at a bowl of what was lying on the table, and and, what is that? And somebody said, that's food. What is that? You know, so
yeah, you were on a much bigger dose.
I was on a big dose and I wasn't prepared. And
No.
that's a whole nother story. Yeah, right.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's a big part of why I'm doing this podcast is to teach people. And so so know your dose. It's like, well, I
Yeah.
don't know what my dose is. Well, research.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw that and I downloaded your safety protocols, or what do you call it? The document.
Oh, yes. If you go to my website, which is this is my little plug, psychedelicdivas.com. I will exchange for your email. I will give you my psychedelic safety tips, including what to do when things go wrong. And
Right.
and it's
Good.
not just it's like
We'll
20
get
pages.
more to that too. I think it's very important what you're doing with that. Um, so would you say that that experience was a spiritual experience?
I would say yes at this point, looking back, and but I wouldn't have called it
At
that
the
at the
time,
time.
you wouldn't have called it
No,
that. Yeah.
no. What I would say now,
Mhm.
um, I would say that uh, psychedelics were part of my soul path,
Mm.
and that they were obviously going to be important to my life. And this first experience was initiating me into that, and that's why that message came. Oh, everything they've said has been a lie. In other words, trust your inner knowing on this. Um, you,
Yeah.
don't stay in the fear. I mean, of course, there's all kinds of things to fear around psychedelics. Yes, but to me, it was an initiatory. This is an important path for you, and you should keep exploring this.
So did it immediately become kind of a path for you that you began to use different psychedelic substances for the purpose of continuing your journey or enhancing your consciousness, or what
Well, I
would
did
you
use it
say?
to continue my journey, but not so much from a consciousness perspective. So that boyfriend, we then went on to try MDMA together, and we used mushrooms, quite a bit for fun and recreation. And I spent the next 10 years recreational. I was clubbing, I was going hiking, I was creating parties with friends, um, outings to downtown San Francisco, to explore different things. I mean, I spent 10 years like just fully solidly having a blast in the recreational zone, and I learned a ton. I learned about, dosing. I learned about being able to navigate the world and still and while high, like without staring and saying, wait, what, this is food, what is food, like so that was a big part of knowing our dose. I was became the default sort of uh safety person guide. Oh, go ask Carla, she'll know. And so I became a little bit of a teacher. Like people would be like, well, like how much should I, the mushrooms? I'm like, no, don't take that one. Like, that's too much.
Mm.
And I feel like I did a lot to kind of keep our community safe. And but that was all learning, not from, there was no internet. And uh, we were learning a lot on the fly, and I certainly had no concept of setting.
Mm.
But we were lucky. Like we had, I mean, we were lucky on so many levels. But we had good instincts. We
Uh-huh.
had good instincts, and I had good, solid, fairly fairly healthy friends, so
Mhm.
that we weren't dealing with mental health breakdowns or crises or
Mhm.
so. I mean, just lucky on many, many,
Nobody
many
jumped out of a
levels.
window. Yeah.
Nobody jumped out of a window.
Mhm.
So that was the first
Yeah.
decade. I didn't start using them for consciousness exploration until I had a dear friend who had been a Mormon. He was had left the church, but he was a spiritual seeker, and I turned him on to mushrooms, and then I turned him on to MDMA first, and then mushrooms, and he found Terrence McKenna, and so we went to listen to Terrence in the East Bay, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. And but this friend was very taken with
You weren't
Terrence.
necessarily blown away, it sounds like.
I wasn't blown away by Terrence.
Uh-huh.
But again, this is my first crossing into these or something more. These
Mhm.
substances might have something more to offer than just a fun night in town.
Mhm.
And this friend then, by following Terrence, went to the Palenque conference, the ethnobotanical conferences in Palenque, Mexico, that Terrence had co-created. And he met Ralph Metzner there. And when he came back, he had gone down, in his words, I went down there, like Terrence, 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 but I came back, Ralph, Ralph, Ralph. And when he started telling me about the work that he had been doing with Ralph,
Uh-huh.
I went, I want that.
Uh-huh.
And
What was
he
it
introduced
about
me.
that at that point before you'd experienced it? And we'll talk about this, but I'm also someone who spent many years working with Ralph. Um, and for those who don't know, Ralph Metzner was one of the three figures at Harvard that were much lesser known to the mainstream world, I think. There was Tim Leary, who became a counterculture icon and charismatic figure. Ram Dass, who was then Richard Alpert, and it became probably one of the people who brought spirituality, particularly Eastern spirituality, to this country more than anyone else, Ram Dass. And the third was Ralph Metzner, who went on a very different kind of journey and passed on very powerful teachings to those people who did have the gift, really, a blessing to have worked with him. And so, Carla, you met Ralph, but what was it about that you even heard about him that
Oh,
intrigued you at this place you were in, where you were having lots of fun with psychedelics?
so this is where I start talking soul path.
Yeah.
So first of all, when this friend went to Palenque and didn't invite me or tell me about it, I was really mad. I was like, what? Like, I turned you on to all this stuff. How could you not have told me about this conference? So I made sure that I went to that conference the next year, and actually I went to the next 2 years, and then Terrence had passed, and they stopped doing it. But so I was irritated at this friend,
Mhm.
and I was reading a Tom Robbins book with my mother my mother and I were traveling in Southeast Asia,
Uh-huh.
and I was in a hotel room. I'm reading this Tom Robbins book. I'm not sure which one it was, but in it he lists all of these teachers, and I knew like Terrence was one of them, and I knew maybe I don't know three, maybe there was like a dozen names, and I knew maybe like three or four, but they were all really interesting people, and I was like, okay, I need to find out who the rest of these people are, and
This was
and then
Tom Robbins. Tom Robbins book,
Tom Robbins,
a novel
the
that he wrote.
novel, yeah, the
Oh,
novel.
he named all
He,
these people that,
he
yeah,
it's I
yeah,
think it's because they're the I think if I remember correctly, I think it's because he's talking about the like the University of Timbuktu, and
uh-huh,
this is who teaches there, and is
yeah,
I don't know if any of it's true because it's of
yeah.
course a fictional book, right? But he was dropping breadcrumbs, and
Mhm.
I picked up the breadcrumbs, and I said to myself, because I was irritated with this friend, I said, well, whatever this friend does next, I'm going to do. So I came back from this trip, and I called him up and I said, okay, what are you doing next? And he said, oh, well, this weekend I'm going to do a workshop with Michael Harner, who wrote The Way of the Shaman. And I'm like, okay, shamanism. Well, I said that whatever he's doing next, I'm going to do. So I was blessed to be able to take this workshop with Michael Herner, who is another icon in the world of
Yeah, I also did some workshops with him, sure. But
yeah
could I come
transformational
back
journey.
to this relate to the Tom Robbins book? Was Michael Harner mentioned?
No,
Or,
it was just so it was just it. I was reading that book. It made me think about the since Terrence was in it. It made me think about that this friend had gone to this conference. It
okay,
reminded me that I was irritated with him. And it told me to the little voices in my head were like, you should do
I
whatever
see.
this friend's going to do
Following
next.
the thread of where your mind went, took you.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, but it was literally that weekend. I came home from
Uh-huh.
this trip with my mother, and it was that weekend. So it was a little drop into my consciousness, like, hey, call this friend, find out what he's doing.
Yeah.
So we at during lunch, we were talking about our process in this workshop. It was like shamanism 101.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. Finding, going down in the underworld and finding your power animal.
right, and this is sober, obviously.
Is this in Berkeley?
This was in San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
But yes, you're learning
I
how
thought I
to.
might have been there because I was at the ones in Berkeley.
Oh, funny, yes. So this would have been 1996.
Uh-huh.
And
Oh,
it wasn't, yeah, I think it was in San Francisco. And so this is sober, but this is using a lot of this is starting to use the technique of that we're using with psychedelics. And Michael Harner was certainly psychedelically informed, but this was classic shamanism, using a drum as the through line to
rhythmic
navigate.
drumming to
Hmm.
induce the altered state. Yeah.
Exactly. So my friend and I were discussing, what had happened, our experiences had been, because you're journeying four different people in the in the
Yeah.
in the training, and he was just way better at it than I was. And I said, well, how come you're so much better at this than I am? And he said, oh, I've been working with this guy, and which was Ralph Metzner,
This
and
Ralph Stevenson. Yeah.
and so he said, I've been working with this guy and I've been having these psychedelic journeys with him. And like I had this one where all of my ancestors, I could see them all come, all behind me, and on both lineages, both sides, and this. And I was like, wait a minute.
Mhm.
I've never had that kind of experience.
Mhm.
I want that. Are
Mhm.
you, are you, like that's
Mhm.
possible? I
Mhm.
mean, as I said, I was a 10-year, the 10-year party girl with these substances.
You mostly tripped with your eyes open.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one thing.
Yes.
And there was no guide
No.
suggesting, yeah, go here, go
Nope.
there. Right.
Nope. We were all talking. There was music. It was always an experience. I never did it on my own, and it was always an experience with friends. Like, oh, we're gonna have this party. Oh, we're gonna go, do this hike. Like, I was always, I was one of the major creators of what we were going to do, and
Yeah.
then the substances
Yeah.
were layered into that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how, when the eyes, what we call our eyes, our physical eyes are open, we don't have our inner eye looking
Right.
inward, right?
I
Or at least it's
I
very
had
tricky
zero.
to do
I
that.
had zero inner eye.
So closing your physical eyes
Hmm.
can begin to allow you to look inside and do things like explore ancestors or all the things that,
All of the things that Ralph taught us.
yeah,
I didn't know any of that was possible. And that workshop with Michael Harner opened
yeah,
me to different ways of exploring consciousness.
right,
That
right.
was that crossed the boundary right there. That workshop, not Ralph, which obviously, became Ralph is my major teacher for 22 years.
Mhm.
But that moment that where you're working with journeying and asking for spirit guides to provide answers, and doing that sober, and learning those processes, that's what crossed me over into a spiritual consciousness perspective, with psychedelics.
Mhm. Yeah. And then hearing that you could do that with the amplification of psychedelics with this
Right,
guy, Ralph Metzner, who
right.
leads these circles or works with
Yes,
people in that way.
exactly.
You know,
But
yeah.
there is, again, those places of the soul is dropping you breadcrumbs. And so for
Uh,
me, that first LSD journey was a breadcrumb. Um, the sort of gel, Terrence was a breadcrumb, but he was a smaller one.
uh-huh,
And then going to that conference, like being upset that I hadn't, been invited, with my friend, to go to that conference. That was a big breadcrumb, and I did go. As I said, I went to it for the next 2 years. Um, and
yeah.
then, Michael Harner was a breadcrumb.
Mhm.
And then, but the biggest breadcrumb was how my body reacted when my friend told me about the work he was doing with Ralph. And as I said, everything I just said, I want that.
Mhm. Yeah. Just to explain for anyone who may not be picking up on the metaphor of the breadcrumbs, that I think what you're saying is that your soul or your higher self or your spirit is dropping into your mind clues that will take you where you really need to go. That
Yes.
sort of like the way
Spiritual breadcrumbs that,
spiritual take
that,
you to your spirit on your spiritual path.
yeah, I think my soul,
Pick up
um,
that breadcrumb and then,
yeah, my,
oh,
my
there's another
soul,
one, and then there's a,
right,
yeah,
knew that I needed to make a journey from
yeah,
that sort of very straight, upbringing that I had
yeah.
to using these tools, first of all, to using these tools, and then to using them, in with such a spiritual, connection to consciousness, and deeper awareness. And so I had to make that journey.
Mhm.
And I think my soul dropped these little spiritual breadcrumbs into my path.
Yeah,
And I could feel the way they landed in my body. It was like, oh, I should pay attention to this.
you
I need
make
to do
choices
this.
based on that.
Yes.
And you weren't always conscious that
No,
that's where it was going to take you. Like I was very different journey to get to Ralph, but
I would love to hear.
I saw in one of the underground papers, Berkeley Barb or one of those in those days, that little notice that said Maps of Consciousness Retreat with Ralph Metzner, who I'd never seen or anything. I had seen Tim Leary and had seen Ram Dass, and thought, well, this is the third guy. I want to follow up on that.
So you knew, either did you read about who he was, or did you know that he was the third
I
guy?
only knew that he was one of those three at Harvard,
Okay,
so that he was like a very psychedelically informed
right.
person.
So when you
And
read this, you were like, oh, I know who this guy is. Okay,
kind of, I'm like,
kind
just
of.
do that. That's all I knew. I
Right,
didn't know anything about how he was or who he was. And when I first
right,
met him, I was very unimpressed because he looked extremely straight, and I was very identified with the hippie culture.
right.
And his hair was short, very closely cropped. Yeah, no beard. Didn't have any of the paraphernalia you're supposed to have. And he seemed very rather stiff, actually, to tell you the truth.
Yes,
And
very Germanic.
yeah, and so yeah, at this retreat, it's kind of a long story, but at one of the sessions, I dropped a little LSD, and he introduced this Agni yoga work, which is
Mhm.
what he was just beginning to get involved in school in Southern California, and
Yes.
completely. That was like a whole loaf of bread. That was
Right.
that
There you
was
go. But
yeah.
I love that you took some LSD with it so that you know, it wasn't just like, oh, is this working? Is this not? It's like you were like, yes.
Well, it's like I took the LSD because in those days it was kind of like to take a somewhat small, moderate amount of LSD was a way to see more clearly
Hmm.
whatever I was looking at and people. And so when I didn't particularly resonate with him, I wanted to just take a deeper look. Something had me do that.
Right. See,
Uh,
that's the breadcrumb.
yeah. And then I got this experience of this whole spiritual path, this whole discipline he called Agni Yoga, which he, as you know, integrated into the work he did later with psychedelics. Um, anyway, that was an introduction that was life changing for me. So
Well,
you
when
began
did you
work.
first that you that so
Remember, this is
you were
about you.
I know, but but I'm so
Go ahead.
curious. Well, so you were tripping the first time you worked with Ralph. I love that. But when did you first have a psychedelic experience with Ralph, where he knew about it?
He knew about it then after I went up to him afterwards. Because the first experience was I went in and there was a whole group.
Hmm.
Nobody was doing psychedelics at the retreat, as far as I know. And the experience was very, very powerful. And I went up to him afterward and I said, well, how do you follow up with this? Where is this? And so he thought for a minute where it looked like he went and disappeared. He went
Right.
into this kind of invisible place, and then he came back down and said, "Okay, well, come over here." And he took me into this little cabin, and he did it one to one with me while I was still under the influence of
Oh,
the
wow.
LSD.
Uh-huh.
And that was when it really felt like a total transformation of every cell of my body kind of becoming imbued with or freed with this
Hmm.
inner light that had been talking about.
Hmm.
So yeah, so yeah, that's just a little bit of my story, but back to you. So you started working with Ralph. You started
I,
attending.
well, I first I worked with him. Um, well, first I worked with him a little bit as a therapist because I needed to have his level of comfort before he would offer me to do a one-on-one session with him. So I worked with him for a little bit as a therapist, and then he offered a one-on-one psychedelic guided therapy session, and that was 1996, and that was you know, beautiful, powerful, really, really transformative because that's the first time, it's the first time eye shades, right? That's the first time that and so he's asking me questions, and then I'm going in, and I'm having, my whole experience, and finding these deeper answers, and seeing all these deeper connections to things. So this is my first time where everything is sort of like, in terms of what psychedelics can really provide. This is the first time I'm fully embodying and seeing and visualizing. I mean, all of it. It's all coming, into my awareness in that one-on-one session.
uh,
And then he invited me. That was in the spring of 1996, and he invited me to come to a group in the fall. And so I did that group, and he was just beginning to do. See, Ralph, the reason that I stayed with him as a teacher for 22 years is that Ralph guided during the groups. So I know that the traditional
That's
right
what I
now
was
is,
going to ask you to talk about a little bit, is that
yeah,
he has a very different, or had a very
very,
different
very
approach
highly interventional.
to sitting for psychedelics than just about anybody else.
Yep.
I know you're very wired into the psychedelic world, and I would
Hmm.
ask you about that. Do you find anybody doing anything on that
There's
order?
just I only know of a very small
Yeah,
amount of people who continued his lineage,
who
and
worked with him,
interesting.
right?
I'm sorry.
They worked with him. In other words,
They worked with him. But yes, you're right. So I don't know outside of Ralph's lineage anyone who's doing that like who
so could
came
you
up with it on their
describe
own.
for everybody, who, mostly people who don't know, what
Right.
is the difference? What is the range of ways that people are doing these things that you know of, and what was Ralph's approach?
Well, it's sort of like an intervention scale. So the least amount of intervention is you alone in your closet in the dark. Okay, that's the least amount of input. And then if you add music, that's an intervention. If you come out into the room and there's other things happening, that's an intervention. If you have someone sitting with you, that's an intervention. So you can see, Ralph was all the way to the opposite end of the scale because what he ended up creating and doing was, I mean, Ralph was he was a mapper of consciousness, and he was so brilliantly well read. And so what he did is that he created these guided journeys that he would take us on, and so together we were, um, you know, uh, he called it a spirit canoe. So like the spirit canoe, we'd all come be on the same spirit canoe. So we're all having our individual experience, but we're on the same spirit canoe, and this is where the spirit canoe was going, where the guided meditations are leading. And I mean, he invoked Norse mythology, we ancestral lineages. We did deep mother father work. We did work where he explored this realm that he had termed the soul council, where the soul is about to incarnate and it is surrounded by all the other souls who are going to have the most impact in your life, and you're looking, it's a life review, you're looking at the life you're saying yes to, and you are making the agreements with your soul buddies. Okay, you're going to be my father this lifetime. You'll be my sister. We'll get married. Et cetera. Like the overall parameter of your life is being set in this soul council, and then you incarnate and forget everything. And that's why I refer to the breadcrumbs, because I think the soul, instills in each of us these little memories, these places. You're supposed to, there's something more. You're supposed to be doing this. This isn't quite right. This doesn't feel good, and so that's how we make that's how the soul directs us, is whether things feel aligned or exciting or, negative or fearful. And
So
I
Carla,
learned all of that from Ralph
uh-huh,
in psychedelic space.
right, right. So just to put it out there, I mean, some people argue that to intervene in that way is to suggest or even manipulate a
Yep.
person's consciousness. And that if in fact it's true that the soul um, drops these breadcrumbs, if you give the person the medicine and you have just a safe setting, they're going to find that themselves.
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
that's the general attitude
Absolutely.
and approach
And
to
and
psychedelic
I
therapy that most people are doing, and even in the underground.
I
And,
fully support that. I fully support that. I think that's the way especially for most people, that's how it should be. But I had opportunities I had other, Ralph introduced me to one of my other teachers, who's still alive, and an incredible wisdom keeper. And she created a women's group that I was part of for the next several years. And she didn't, there was no guiding in that group, but I mean, she held impeccable feminine space. I learned so much from how she held circles. And, you know, I did have that opportunity to just, you know, let the medicine, you know, it's just me and the medicine, right? And music. And so I had those experiences and they were profound and I 100% support this traditional way of working with the medicine.
Mhm.
But for me, when I went to Ralph's groups, I was like, I'm being guided to places and into things that I didn't know existed.
Mhm.
And I couldn't have gotten there on my own.
Mhm.
And that was the value to me. Now this very first group that I went to, so Ralph was just starting to do this.
Mhm.
And so he had, I think most people had been in his group, you know, prior. And he he actually he provided you could have your choice of the medicine. He stopped doing that because I think he wanted the group to all be in more of a psychic alignment.
Mhm.
But there was a choice of medicine that night,
Mhm.
and I took ayahuasca because I had never had it before, and I think most people took mushrooms. And so he actually said, "I'm gonna sort of, you know, I'm gonna try something out here, and you can, you know, tune it out or you can follow along." I mean, it was like optional.
Mhm.
And the next day in the integration circle, there was a woman who had been in his groups before. She was actually sort of a famous tantra teacher, and she was like, "I hated it. That was terrible. I, you know, I like." And I never saw her again in any of Ralph's groups.
She
So
didn't like the fact that he was talking and
she did not like that he was
yeah,
interrupting her
suggesting
journey.
things and so forth. Yeah,
She
I've
found it
experienced
annoying.
circles where that happened too.
Yeah. So that was a so there it was not for everyone.
Yeah,
And you're right. Ralph is, you know, he's
yeah,
inserting a worldview. He's
yeah,
inserting, you know, like that this place that the Soul Council exists.
yeah.
But it's to me it was you know, is the Soul Council real? I don't. I'll tell you, you know, on the other side, right?
Mhm.
Or I won't if there is no other side. But it was a framework
Mhm.
to hang a life structure on. And I didn't have to like fully believe the Soul Council exists in order to get benefit from the framework.
Mhm. Mhm.
And in order to look at something and say, oh, you know, to call forth on a soul level important people in my life and say what was our agreement,
Mhm.
and to feel and to get an answer
Mhm.
and to feel the resonance of that, like that makes sense.
Yeah,
And so whether it's true or not, I was able to get skills that helped me deepen my knowledge of my personal knowledge of myself, my relationships, and my engagement actually with the world. So
yeah. Oh, you know, Ralph was he promoted the idea of radical empiricism, which I think he got from William James.
I'm sorry, radical.
Empiricism. Empiricism
Mhm.
is the scientific method essentially, which is that you make an observation and then you form a hypothesis, and then you basically come to say, okay, this is what seems true, at
Mhm.
least for now, the best truth that I know that I can believe. And the thing is, what William James suggested and what Ralph really applied very strongly is that you can do that with subjective experience. You could go inside,
Mhm.
and if another person goes inside and they have the same experience, that's an observation that could be called objective. Just like you see that tree out there, I see that tree out there, that tree
Right.
is really there, you know. And so these soul council experiences tended to validate because people really in the experience had that experience. It was real.
Everybody came back with something.
Yeah. So that was my sense.
Yes.
You know, Ralph also came to the psychedelic guiding world after having spent 10 years in this group that taught this Agni Yoga approach,
Hmm.
where we would sit in group formation and our teacher, Russell, would guide these experiences. And he was talking, guiding these
Oh, okay.
meditations. He
Got
wasn't
it.
doing like mindfulness teachers tend to do,
Right.
just open, be aware, and then whatever happens, happens. It was like an intervention. He was like guiding us to these soul places,
So that's where that came from.
and then
Okay.
he brought that together with psychedelics.
Yes.
That was the thing. Yeah,
And I don't think at that time, I don't think anyone else on the planet was doing what Ralph was doing.
yeah,
And so I was like, I'm sticking with this.
yeah. And as you said, there were people who didn't like
No, right,
doing and
right.
had philosophical objections to it.
Hmm.
It was intervention in the sense that it was interfering with the
Right.
person's real, genuine journey. And I think it took a very special kind of consciousness to be able to offer those suggestive ways of focusing your attention without it being
Yes.
controlling the person's mind,
I
reminding
agree.
them.
There had to
He
be a
really
certain
was
level of,
offering you, take a look
yes,
at this, see if it's true for you. Be curious.
yes.
Yeah,
And I think there was a certain level of, I mean, he obviously curated who was in the groups. So there was a certain level of, um, you know, emotional intelligence or I mean, like just psychic health or whatever. Like, I mean,
self-selection. Yeah,
and so, and most people were seekers and looking for this sort of, additional level of awareness and intervention. But Alan, I want to talk about how we know each other, because I think that's we're
we were
really,
in
really
those circles together for many times.
well, and those circles. I mean, it wasn't just one night.
Yeah,
Ralph was creating 5, 6 day,
right.
experiences where each day there'd be a different medicine. So, I've talked about how it felt like my guides were like, okay, we'll show her this and then we'll build on it. And then the next night we'll add more information. And it felt like it would just kept growing and building within my own awareness. But I'm curious, what was it like for you to come to those groups?
Oh, it was always a very powerful, transformative experience. I mean, each night, like you said, he would use a different medicine or offer a different medicine, different set of teachings, and it always informed my life more deeply. They were one of the things that I appreciated about that approach was that that process that he would guide us through was a teaching that you then could explore, or I would find
Hmm.
myself
Hmm.
exploring afterwards.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah, like you didn't mention it, but like the six realms that the Buddhist wheel of life
Hmm.
has, or the soul council, those were things that I continued to try to work with. And then as a therapist, sometimes could share with or help. Because and as a psychotherapist,
Yes.
I integrated meditative teachings and inner guided processes with people, just
Well, I use
inner exploration.
the same thing. I use it in my coaching,
Use it as a
and I
coach.
use it I use it as part of the framework to help, so I mean, part of my coaching is focused on well, all my coaching is focused on helping people through like the transformational times in their life. So that can be it can be a divorce, it could be a job change, a midlife crisis, a
Mhm.
psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
And I use these frameworks to help people to try to, understand, what's going on, what is this shift? Because sometimes, if you're not in flow with shifts like that, they're painful, they're hard, it's really difficult. And so,
It's
I
like a
mean,
debt. Yeah.
yeah, so I use a lot of what Ralph taught me as tools in my coaching to help people, understand what is this sort of bigger thing that they're going through, not just, and put a bigger framework around it.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to give some time to you for you to talk a little bit about your new mission, your new project, which is the podcast. And because I really honor the intention that you have expressed about it on your website and so forth. So I wanted to ask you to share a little bit about why are you doing this and what's it in
Why are you doing
the
this?
shorter form, not the long story
Yeah.
of how hard it was to get to do it, but that's on the website,
Oh yeah.
on your
Yeah.
YouTube.
If you want to know, you want to know the long form, that's my first episode because it was hard. It was
But
hard.
why? What's the intention? Like we ask
Well,
for.
the long and the short is that this was handed to me by my guides in a psychedelic journey, and I was shown that it was important for me to do this, whether I wanted to do it or not.
Mhm,
And the reason it's important is that the psychedelics, we're having, obviously, they're calling it a psychedelic renaissance, this resurgence,
mhm,
this explosion. It's going to become, it is exploding worldwide again. And because of the work that we've done with Ralph and with my other teacher, who was trained by Leo Zeff, the secret chief, and then other elders. I mean, I live in the psychedelic community in the Bay Area is my community, so I have a lot of knowledge from those past 40 years, and so I was just shown that it was important to try to steer this ship because it's going to get rocky. It's going to get messy, and the best way that I could do that is to try to keep a feminine, and I don't mean gender, but
uh-huh,
our feminine nature. So that's intuition, our ceremonial, our spiritual side, nurturing, compassion, caring. Those are all the feminine. We all have, we have both a feminine and masculine aspects to each of us. And it was those feminine traits that I was shown if could be needed to be applied to the psychedelic world as it, kind of comes online with this medical model and possibly legal change in legal status, maybe not. Um, and so the tagline for the podcast, which is psychedelic divas, and so it's the divine feminine. That's what divas comes from. It's the Latin for the divine feminine, and trying to keep us in our inner divinity and our inner knowing, like listening to those breadcrumbs and honoring them. So it's the tagline is demystifying the world of psychedelics through the wisdom of the divine feminine. And because I've been in the Bay Area in the psychedelic world for 40 plus years, I'm blessed to really know a lot of amazing women who have been, keepers of the psychedelic flame, or the new ones who are, picking it up and carrying this out into the world. And so um, it's my some of it's my teaching, but most of it is me interviewing, just like this, uh, the psychedelic uh, feminine leaders, and trying to look at this world that's about to really, I think, really explode, and to how do we keep ourselves safe? And there's just a big focus on harm reduction, which is why I have that psychedelic safety guide, including what to do when things go wrong. Which, if you go to psychedelic divas, that's divas with an S, .com, I will exchange it for your email. But for me, the focus of this is safety and harm reduction, and then uh, beyond that, it's teaching the sacred, the ceremonial, the fun,
mhm,
the all the various ways that these medicines can be used, and to keep people safe while they're doing it.
yeah. Yeah, I watched your interview, just your most recent interview with Melissa Whippo,
Hmm.
and yeah, just the idea that she's exploring the use of ketamine legally uh,
Hmm. Right.
to work with women and exploring just a broader sense of what she's doing personally with
Hmm.
the idea that women can use it for prenatal issues, postnatal,
Hmm. Yes.
postpartum depression, menopause, menstrual.
Yeah, we were, that's this, it's that whole episode is about women's health. And so a lot, so it's
Right.
from menstruation to menopause. What are the various, there's no studies yet, right? Nobody's looking at it. So it's only our own stories.
Mm.
But they are starting to do, because ketamine is legal, they are starting to do some studies. And she actually did the first study to test uh, uh, whether ketamine would be safe for lactating mothers. And it turns out that it's a very, 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 very small percentage that's passed on. And ketamine has a half-life of 12 hours. So if you were concerned about it, you could pump and not use that breast milk for 12 hours and then, safely come back
Uh-huh.
to which is
Great to
which is a
know.
big deal because the other option is ongoing SSRIs,
Right.
which
Which
which are
definitely get
right.
passed on. Yeah. So um, psychedelics are exploding. You're concerned about safety, as am I, and where it's all going. There is this idea, and certainly in the 60s, when psychedelics were exploding then,
Hmm.
um, there was like a culture that was very, very recognizable. You
Right.
knew by the length of a guy's hair, or the
Right.
clothes that people wore,
Right.
or where they congregated. I mean,
Yes.
I came to California to go to Haight-Ashbury because I
Hmm.
had got turned on with LSD.
Right.
Um, in every town, in every city, there were little enclaves, like Greenwich Village or Haight-Ashbury in big sense. And uh, these days, it's very different. It's very
Yes.
spread out. It's very decentralized. I think a lot of people are doing things in very small groups or just individually.
Hmm.
Um, what's your sense of how an evolving psychedelic culture, if that we can talk about that, or a society that's influenced in a positive way by psychedelics, as
Right.
well as if you want to comment on how it might be influenced in a negative way, is
Now
evolving.
let's look at the positive. There's enough negative going on. So in 2021, we're still, hanging out at home for the most part with COVID. And I spent that year on the Clubhouse app, and it was a new app, and it was a new social media app, and it was all audio. So you could listen to people, and you could be engaging with people. And I started, um, I joined that app, and I had a bunch of psychedelic friends who, once you join the app, it says, "Oh, look, who else is here," and it connects you to everybody. And I
Uh-huh.
had a bunch of psychedelic friends, and they were all like, "Hey, we're hanging in this clubhouse. That within Clubhouse there are clubhouses, and called the Psychedelic Clubhouse. Come." And so people would host rooms with topics, and there would be speakers, and there would be audience people, and you could raise your hand and ask questions. And I kept getting pulled up on stage. It's like, "Oh, Carla's here. Like she'll know. Ask her." And because these friends knew that I had some knowledge. And I ended up hosting my own rooms for the next year, and I often did it with two other women. And the most common room we hosted was preparation, intention, and integration. And so I did that for a year, and got followers, and it was fun. And I learned from that, and that was that was 2021. I learned the global explosion of psychedelics. I mean, like India was coming on like strong. The Middle East. I had all these followers from the Middle East. Russia, South America. I mean, it was everywhere. I actually hosted a room one time. I said, "Okay, only people from foreign countries, can come up. And what I want to hear your take in your country of what's the psychedelic scene, experience, culture." And I mean, I think we were all blown away by it's everywhere. And that's when it came to me that, and I have this on my website, you know, the the genie that it's, I say it better on my website. Um, the genie's not going back in the bottle, and the bottle's been blown up. It's been blown to smithereens. Like you can't put the psychedelic genie back in the bottle. it's not going to happen. It's everywhere. And people can now know that they can grow their own mushrooms. I mean, what's that? So I was amazed and horrified by what I learned on Clubhouse, because the level of questions that people were coming to us with it was very scary to me that
Well,
they
tell me, you did say you wanted to be positive, but you can't help but talk about that. So
well,
what was the
that's why
what were you horrified about and what was
well,
scary?
that's why we did the rooms, was to teach, right? So that was the positive.
What was the scary part?
Um, there was a guy who came once, and he said, "Has um has anyone ever done a group with 8 people?" And like everybody was like, like the people who were hosting the room with the knowledge were kind of like, "What? What do you mean?" And he said, and someone asked him a question like, "Well, what are you asking about?" He said, "Well, I've been hosting uh, psilocybin journeys in my garage for up to 4 people every week. And, I'd like to, it's a lot of work, et cetera. And I'm just wondering, is it possible? Would it be safe? Is it okay if I had 8 people instead of 4?"
Um,
And so
he
like
didn't know anything about what he was really doing.
he didn't know anything.
Yeah, that's and that's what, that's the worry that people
Yes.
are entering into this. I'm,
Right.
I'm a shaman, I'm a guide, and,
Yes.
and
So there's that.
yeah.
I also hosted a room once on come tell your stories of what went wrong. And then we analyzed them. So like and pretty much across the board, the major reasons that something goes wrong is that someone's in a wrong setting, where they don't feel safe, they can't get out, or
Mhm.
or they're with the wrong people, which is part of setting, or the dose. So those are the sort of 2 major areas. And so just teaching that just those 2 things, to have awareness of the setting and the people that you're going to be with, and to really know what your dose is.
And I would add the lack of preparation,
Yes.
the lack of preparation.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
even if there's not guiding during the session, which
Hmm.
generally there's not, and it's probably
Right.
a good idea that it's not, unless somebody really has learned how to do that, I suppose. Uh, then it is fair to offer possible scenarios of what can happen during a session and where you could go and what might
Hmm.
if you explore. So yeah, so good. Any are you hopeful after
Um,
learning about all of what's going on and the worldwide expansion and explosion of psychedelic, given what's happening in the world?
I am scared and hopeful. Yes.
Mhm.
I'm worried. I'm worried. Not scared. I'm worried. I think
Cautious?
there's gonna be it's gonna get messy,
Yeah.
because it's just is going to get messy. And that's because that's how we're going to learn. And what does messy look like? So Matthew Perry um drowning with ketamine. I mean,
Right.
that's so
Although that was a
so well,
misinterpretation of what really happened, right? And
no, I mean, the autopsy, he drowned. I
right,
mean,
he had other drugs in his system and
right.
didn't.
But so there's an awareness here. So that's messy,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah,
now there's an awareness that other people might not have had. Hey, I'm not going to do a large dose of ketamine in water.
and going
Now,
on
you and I knew that
himself.
because
Yeah.
that's how John Lilly died, but they don't know, the new crew doesn't know who that is or what happened. And so Matthew Perry, so that's what I'm saying. I'm worried and hopeful. So that's a total tragedy that Matthew Perry died that way. But there's now this awareness that wasn't present.
Yeah,
So that's what I mean by it's going to get messy.
yeah.
But I think ultimately I'm hopeful.
And you and I, to some extent, see ourselves as having a role in helping steer
Yes.
um, it's a very decentralized set of boats that are
Yes.
going on the waters, the oceanic waters of consciousness.
Yes. And And while I did resist this, I did say yes to it, and I think it's important. So that's what I'm doing.
I think it's important too, Carla, and I really want to support the work you're doing, and
Thank you.
really glad to have had this time with you together.
Well, and thank you for sharing. I know that you're like, oh, this isn't about me, but I did want to hear. I wanted to hear some rough stories that I didn't know. So thank you.
Okay, well, we'll wrap up for now, and thank you again, and thank you everybody who's watching this, whenever you're watching, wherever you're watching, or just listening. And I will post information to contact Carla or learn about psychedelic divas and her work, or also as a coach, on where the YouTube is visible or the podcast is available. Thanks again, Carla.
Oh, thank you, Alan. It was a total
Bye-bye.
pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed it.